In this video, we're going to factor the polynomial 4x squared plus 11x plus 6 using the AC method, which is outlined with a series of steps. To start, the AC method is a method where we're going to factor the trinomial using the product of A and C, which in this case, A times C, A is 4, C is 6, so A times C is going to be 24. So we're going to use that, we'll find AC, and then we will use this to write the expression using 4 terms. And when we have a 4-term expression, one of the only methods we have for factoring that is to use factoring by grouping. So that'll be our last step. Now, what's underneath this process of using AC and then writing it as a 4-term expression is really the process of undoing that process of FOILing. So let's get started. We need to find a pair of numbers whose product is blank and whose sum is blank. Now, the product needs to be A times C. And A times C we found is 24. The sum needs to be the coefficient on our middle term, which in this case is 11. If you recall, when we factor a trinomial whose leading coefficient is 1, we only need the product to be C, that last term. But when the leading coefficient is not 1, we have to use this AC. And truth be told, when the leading coefficient is 1, the product of A and C is simply C. Okay, so we've got step 1. We need to find a pair of numbers whose product is 24 and whose sum is 11. Now, if the product is a positive 24 and the sum is a positive 11, then the next question asks us, what do we know about the signs of these numbers? If the product is positive, then they have to have the same sign, and if the sum is positive, then that means that both numbers are positive. That will help us as we determine which factor pair fits here. So both numbers are positive. Now we're going to create a table of factor pairs for that number 24, which was AC that we found. So let's find factor pairs of 24, and then we'll look at what the sum is for each of those pairs. So we'll start just taking the factors of 24, so 1 and 24 is one factor pair, and that sum is 25. Next, let's take 2 and 12, and that sum will be 14. And after that, we can take 3 and 8, and that sum is 11. So we could continue if we wanted, but at this point, we have the 2 numbers that we need. So the 2 numbers that have the needed sum are 3 and 8. Now, what we're going to do with this 3 and 8 is we're going to use it to break 11x up into 3x plus 8x. So the first thing we're going to do, it says rewrite 4x squared plus 11x plus 6 using 4 terms and then factor it using factoring by grouping. So this first step is critical. We're going to take 4x squared plus 11x plus 6. And we will then write it as 4x squared, and this is where our 3x and our 8x will come in. So we'll write plus 3x plus 8x. Plus 6. Now those are equivalent. 11x is the same as 3x plus 8x. What we've done is identified that this 3x and 8x are the 2 middle terms we need in order for us to be able to factor this using factoring by grouping. So at this point we have 4 terms, and so now using factoring by grouping we'll group this into 2 groups of 2. And so we'll put 4x squared plus 3x in parentheses to group that. And then we will add 8x plus 6, which is also grouped in parentheses. Now we look at each of these groups individually, and we'll factor out the greatest common factor from each. So with 4x squared plus 3x, we can factor x out, and we're left with 4x plus 3 inside parentheses. Then we're adding, again, this grouped 8x plus 6, and we're going to factor out as much as we can from there, and the common factor between 8x and 6, the greatest common factor there will be just 2. And so we're left with 2, and then that inside parentheses will have 4x plus 3. Now, between these two groups, 4x plus 3 is a common factor to each, And so we will factor that out, and we'll be left with 4x plus 3 times the expression x plus 2. Okay, and that outlines our process. So we find AC, we look for factor pairs that have a product that is A times C, and a sum that matches the coefficient on our middle term. We then take the expression, that's a trinomial, we make it a 4-term polynomial using those specific numbers we found, and then we use factoring by grouping.